So now I'd like to turn to Jamie Bothwell, who again is going to talk to us about the underbody detail of passenger cars. Jamie, welcome.
Good evening. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about water in and water out. So there's a blank slide that I just added. You have two things going on here. The main one is the air pressure water system, which is often abbreviated the APWS. And that's the water tank that you see under the car. And then of course there's wastewater, and those are primarily chutes. Again, obviously the wastewater comes from a sink or a toilet. If you want to detail the inside of the car, that's technically not the underframe, so that's not my area of expertise. So, all right, so you're looking at Overdale here. Overdale is in the Railway Museum of Greater Cincinnati. It's in Covington, Kentucky. And you see there's a battery box and here's an air tank, but the big part of the underframe that you see right here is the APWS tank. Now I'm going to show you a little picture later. Really what you're looking at is not the APWS tank, but the cover over the APWS tank. And so what there is there's a stainless steel tank inside that cover. Now, what I would tell you is if you ever come across a preserved car somewhere, of all the systems I've discussed, it's very most likely that the water system is going to be original, because essentially it was a stainless steel tank. Haven't really come up with a better way to store water than stainless steel tanks. So those are often just left as is. Even on tourist railroad type cars, they're still sort of operational. Okay. This one is, I believe, Overdale, but I'm not. No, it was, I don't know. Anyway, it's another car from, Jobsburg, something like that. Anyway, again, you see they've removed some parts, but one of the things they've left is the APWS tank. Okay. Here's Mount Baxter, also from the museum in Covington. Now you'll see, if I could move that up just a little bit, I probably should have made the slide a little smaller. I wasn't counting on this control bar at the bottom. I don't know, maybe you guys can see it, but you can see that the, you can kind of notice that the metal covering of the tank is beginning to peel away. So there's the, there's the proof in the pudding, so to speak, that that's really not the tank itself, but just a cover over the tank. You can kind of notice like a little thin strap in there where they probably joined two pieces of metal. This gadget over here is kind of like the flush handle. And I'll show you some more end tank views in just a minute. Okay, so here's the pro detail level. If you really want to make your car stand out, you can add these little metal handles to the ends of your tank. This gadget, I believe, covers something to do with the heater. I'm not entirely sure.
On your
Okay. All right. Here is the inside of the tank. If you'll see, this is a regulator from last week we talked about. This is the regulator that's going to put steam into the water tank, or some of the water tank, in order to give hot water to the passengers. So here's your regulator from last week. This is the internal heating part of the tank. That's probably a big pile of asbestos. I didn't investigate it too carefully because, of course, it's not good stuff. Anyway, so here is our S-scale, one of our S-scale versions. We have two. Both of them are not completely without their problems. This one has a nice tank handle detail, but that's got, you didn't notice so many rivets on that strap in the middle, or maybe so prominent of rivets on the end. Again, depending on the car you're looking at, some of these end rivets, let's see if we go back to that one, you can see that has sort of two rows of smaller rivets, but I have seen some that I didn't necessarily notice any rivets on at all. Certainly this middle band often is rivet free, shall we say, at least not that prominent. Okay, so anyway, that's the BTS part in S-scale. If you're not an S-scaler, maybe the HO guys, you get one of these on your car already. I consider this to be one of the most important details on a heavyweight Pullman car, because virtually every heavyweight Pullman car had this. All right, and a lot of also, like a coach or a diner would have something, if not identical, something certainly similar. Okay, here's the pre-size version of this. Again, take your pick. You can see they've got the little end blob there, so on and so forth. Okay, This is Tower View. It's at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. Oh, let me just back up a minute. You can see that these tanks were all mounted at the edge of the car. In the heavyweight era, the water tank was mounted off to the edge of the car. It was on one side or the other, okay? When we move to the lightweight era, you go, oh, where's the water tank? It's actually in here, this underneath. It's mounted on the center sill of the car, okay? So the lightweight cars, they're mounted on the center sill, or it's possible that it's mounted, very often on the lightweight era, they had two water tanks, and what they would do is either mount the two of them side by side, so one on either side of the center sill, again with a cover, or one of them end to end. All right, and then these tanks vary in length. I've seen them from anywhere from, say, around 10 or 12 feet all the way up to about 20 feet. There's a sleeper in it's a Northern Pacific sleeper in the Illinois Railway Museum that has an absolutely enormous APWS tank. I measured it, but I forget what it measured out to. I'd have to look that up. Okay, so here is our pre-size. BTS doesn't have a lightweight water tank. This one would cover sort of the skinny 2-in-a-row tank. These two gadgets on the side would be fillers. So that, there's a pipe that comes out to the side of the car, so you don't have to crawl under the middle of the car to fill up the tank. And then they would stick out to either side, kind of like wings. Okay, the next one we've got, this is a car on the Morristown and Erie. Again, this right here is your water tank. You can kind of make out that it is a little bit shorter, but a little bit wider. So this is sort of your wider version. Again, this would sit sort of on the center sill, and there's probably a tank on either side of the center sill that's holding the water. This would be our S-scale version of that. I would tell you, if anything, it might be a little too long. Maybe you buy this and chop it off in the middle or something. I don't know. Cut a couple of these. You buy one and use it for two. I don't know. This is your filler again. So you would put that on as sort of like a little wing that sticks out to either side, and that's where the crew would fill the water tank back up. Okay. Outlet water. Okay, I searched long and hard for a photograph, and here was Tower View again, and there it is right there. This guy right here is your toilet chute. Okay. Now, this is one of these things where I put this program together. I didn't really ever looked at toilet chutes before in all that much detail. But I thought, oh, I wonder, does it have one for every toilet in the car? Or, do they gang up a couple of them and flush out? I know, I'm not that old that I've ridden, or I'm that old, I guess, that I've ridden in cars where they said, don't flush while the train's in the station, and you open the toilet and you can look down and watch the track going by. So you would think they would have a chute kind of under every toilet if that's the case. So most cars had a general toilet on the end for sort of everybody to use. And then if the car had a room, some kind of private room, it would have its own separate toilet in there. So like if you had a 12-in-1 Pullman, it would have one, sort of large restroom area that might have a couple hoppers in it for the men's toilet, one for the women's toilet. And then the drawing room, those would be the section passengers. And then the drawing room would have its own separate toilet. So you ought to have at least 3, maybe 4 chutes under there. But again, I'll have to take account for that. So that's it for tonight. Water's pretty simple. So as I said, if you find a car these days, very often the water system on it is going to be original because it's just a stainless steel tank and it's pressurized. Oh, the other thing I probably should have mentioned is somewhere near the water tank, there's going to be some sort of air tank to pressurize the water to lift it up into the faucets and the toilet, right? So air pressure water system, it's got to have an air tank for the pressure. See, if you look at this tank right here, there's an air tank. That's probably the air tank for the water right there. For this one, I don't know. That could be a brake cylinder, maybe a brake air tank for the brakes, but somewhere in there, there's an air tank for the water. So that's it for tonight. Next week, one of my favorite subjects, air conditioning. Now, obviously, air conditioning doesn't go back to the wood car era. The first air conditioning applications were in the mid to early 30s, early to mid 30s, and so that was when cars really started taking on air conditioning, and so we'll deal with that. So Air conditioning, I'll be a little bit more rushed on because there's a whole bunch of different stuff to talk about with air conditioning. But that's what I got for tonight.
Hey,
Any questions?
hey, Jamie, a question before you jump. Were the size of the tanks defined when they bought the cars based on the routes they were going to be on? So in other words, if a car was going to be on the Zephyr route for 3 days, did they buy those with larger cars than cars that were on shorter 1-day routes? Or is it kind of more by railroad?
That's a good question, and I really can't provide an answer because, again, it requires you to get under a bunch of cars that, like I would have to, I crawl under every passenger car I find, but I would have to find a couple from different railroads to see if they're sort of standardized or whatever.
Right.
And what's preserved these days is, of course, a little bit of a mishmash. I would suggest that it's probably car type and railroad, right? So it's probably a combination. Like if you had a car like, say, a diner that's going to need a little more water. If it's only going, say, New York to Chicago, they can probably get away with a little less water than if it's going, across the country, the west from Chicago to Seattle or something like that. But they also tended to, they did fill these up en route. It was one of the, they didn't, it wasn't like if they ran out of water, they'd be, oh, well, too bad you can't have a drink. They could fill up the water en route. So that was done. So again, I would say probably based on, the route, the car type and the railroad, whatever they felt they needed to get. So.
On the air tank, is that just pre-charged or is there a compressor with that?
The cars did, it was charged by the locomotive.
Okay.
It's part of the air system of the car, like the brakes and everything, it's just tied in with the brakes. So I don't think the car itself wouldn't necessarily have an air compressor. It would have a compressor associated with the air conditioner, possibly, which we'll talk about next week.
Right.
But the air pressure for this would come sort of like from the brake line, as far as I know.
And just be a line tapped off the air line through the car just over to the tank, and it just as it drains it out, it fills it up.
Yeah, I don't know of any cars that had a specific. I've never come across an air compressor under a car, other than the ones that are attached to the it's not really an air compressor. It's for the air conditioner. It has a.
And in a wooden car era, in wooden car era, would that be the same as the heavyweight, basically?
Yeah, they wooden cars often. I've seen a lot of wooden cars that had like it's almost like a wood wrapped tank, and those are often paired. And I think one of those is gas for the lighting, at least. One might be water and one might be gas. Again, as far as the dates on this go, I would imagine that like internal water probably came about around the air brake time, because it would have given them compressed air to fill up to pump the water up into the car.
Right.
So
wooden cars built, say, after 1900 or 1910 or something like this, they would have their own. They would be like same as the heavyweight cars. Yeah,
very, very similar. They might be. The tank itself might be different shaped, but it would still function the same way. Like I said, I have noticed a lot of these wood, like a wooden wrap tank. Although like I said, I know some of those are for gas. I actually am supposed to go to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania on Friday, and one of my plans is to take a quick look at some of the wooden cars they have and see what I've been missing all these years. So I'll give you a quick update next week.
Jamie, thanks so very much. Really do appreciate this, and I think you're really bringing a lot of great information to passenger car modelers. So thanks so much for doing this.